Emily was born in a small, forgotten town, lost somewhere on the map. The houses were packed close together, and the streets were worn down with time, slowly and silently aging. There were no grand opportunities or spectacular wonders like those talked about in big cities, but there were hidden truths, ones that could change the world if someone searched for them long enough. Emily was one of those who searched, and she found them. Her childhood wasn't anything out of the ordinary, except for her own inner world, full of images, fragments of dreams, and strange revelations that were too complex for a girl her age. Her mother often said she was too thoughtful. What she didn't know was that it wasn't just thoughtfulness. It was a sign that Emily was deeper than her peers, that her soul sought to understand not just people, but the very essence of life itself. Emily could sit for hours, motionless, staring at the clouds, thinking about things others might dismiss as trivial. But it was during these moments that she found answers to questions no one had asked. The world around her was alive, and every element in it mattered to her. Her childhood was full of deep connections to nature. She could hear the earth whisper and the winds sing their ancient songs. She felt the sun warm her soul, and the rain brought not only freshness, but a certain wisdom she couldn't explain in words. Emily knew there was more than what everyone else saw, and she was determined to understand it. Her life in town would have been like any other child's if not for one event that happened when she was 8 years old. One day, Emily went into the forest that stretched beyond the town. She often went there to be alone, despite her mother's warnings not to go by herself. The forest was ancient. Its trees seemed as old as the earth itself. It was alive, filled with rustling sounds and unseen movements. That day, it was eerily quiet. Emily walked along the familiar path when she spotted a strange figure standing near one of the old oak trees. It was a man, or something that had once been human. He was old, with long, nearly white hair, and his eyes were so deep that Emily felt as though he could see into her soul. He didn't move, just stood there watching as she approached. But despite his frail appearance, Emily sensed that he was more than just an old man. He was something greater. "You've come," he said in a quiet voice, almost like a whisper carried by the wind through the ancient trees. "I knew you would. You're not just a girl. You're the beginning of a new era." Emily wasn't afraid. She felt he was speaking the truth. Though she was only 8, she had already known that her life would be different from others. He told her about ancient powers that once ruled the world and how these forces were hidden within each person, but only a few could awaken them. He said that Emily was chosen to receive this power because she was ready. He didn't explain what this power was, but Emily understood immediately. She was connected to something much bigger than her small town, bigger than her life. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of the future that awaited her if she accepted this power. After that conversation, Emily began seeking answers. Everything in her life changed. She began to see what others could not. She could understand people without words, feel their emotions, read their thoughts like pages in a book. She also started to see images and symbols that seemed to be keys to understanding what was happening in her life and the world. The abilities Emily gained were confusing at first. She began to feel a connection to things and events that had nothing to do with her daily life. Sometimes, it felt like she heard a voice echoing from the depths of time, telling her that her life would be great. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen in her hometown. People started noticing unusual occurrences. One by one, people began acting as though their minds were under someone's control. Not everyone realized this, but those who did spoke of a shadow that had fallen over the town. There were rumors of a girl who could manipulate reality. At some point, Emily realized that her powers weren't limited to just her small world. Her abilities began to spread, and she could influence things and people from a distance. She could control emotions, manipulate decisions, and shape events. It was frightening, but at the same time, she felt that she was doing this for some greater purpose. Her life had taken on a new form. She was no longer just a girl from a small town. She had become the bearer of a power that could change the world. But Emily remained the same innocent child who had once wandered into the forest and met the old man who predicted her fate. It was in that moment that she began to understand that the power she had received not only gave her control, but also came with an enormous responsibility. She couldn't ignore it, couldn't walk away from it. And this realization haunted her every day, with every step she took toward her destiny. Emily grew, and her power grew stronger, but she also began to understand the price of that power. Whoever could change the course of history had to be ready to pay for it. But what would that price be? Emily didn't know yet, but she knew one thing. Her life, her destiny, and even her death were part of a great chain of events that would one day lead to the moment when she would pass on her power to someone else, someone who would continue her work. And that passing of power would be tied to Emily herself. Several years had passed since Emily first met the old man in the forest. She was almost grown, but no longer the naive girl she once was. There was fire in her eyes, and an inner storm raged in her soul, one that couldn't be extinguished. The power she had gained was now more present than ever in her life. She could no longer ignore it or pretend that things were still the same. The abilities that once seemed strange and random were now an integral part of her existence. Emily no longer just felt people. She could influence their thoughts and actions. She began to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. It wasn't just observation. She could change reality, control time, manipulate the flow of events, though she didn't yet fully comprehend the extent of her powers. But every action had consequences. The more her abilities grew, the more unpredictable the results of her interventions became. People started noticing oddities. Small events where her power left its mark were becoming more obvious and confusing. But most importantly, all of this was beginning to draw attention. Emily understood that, while she had once been just a curious girl, she was now a threat. But something in her heart wouldn't allow her to turn away from her path. She knew she had to use this power to change the world. Her decisions, her interventions in the events around her were growing bolder. Her influence was spreading to larger scales. But all these changes were cautious, almost imperceptible to the outside world. What Emily didn't know was that watchers had been following her every move. People involved in politics, diplomacy, and law enforcement began to feel the shadow of a power that lingered in this place, in this child. At first, it was just rumors, but soon more and more strange coincidences appeared. People who had crossed paths with Emily began to feel as if they were under the shadow of an unseen power, as if invisible threads were connecting them to something greater. But they didn't know who or what was behind it. One of those who sensed the approach of this unusual influence was Donald Trump. At the time, he was just a businessman, but his reputation and ambitions extended far beyond the corporate world. He was a man who always sought to be on top, who was always looking for new ways to dominate any situation. Trump had a rare quality. He could always see opportunities where others saw only risks. But Trump was in New York when he first heard the rumors about Emily. It was a strange coincidence. His associates began discussing a mysterious event in a small town down south. They spoke of a girl who seemed to be able to see the future, who influenced people, who manipulated events. Her name was becoming more and more well-known, and someone in his circle, someone interested in politics and international affairs, mentioned her in conversation as a powerful player who should not be overlooked. But Trump, while intrigued, didn't think much of it at first. However, the more he heard, the clearer it became that this girl, even if she was just a fantasy, was somehow connected to major events. He began to feel that her influence was growing, and it couldn't just be a coincidence. Trump was someone who could feel changes, someone who lived in the rhythm of time. And now, time seemed strange to him. It was compressing around this girl, and Trump knew that she could become a key element if he was on her side. Soon, he made up his mind. He had to meet Emily. He knew she was not just a girl, that her power wasn't just about changing the world. Her power lay in the fact that she could show him a path that would lead to the very top. He wanted to understand what she knew and how He went to the town where she lived. Their meeting was unexpected for both of them. The girl, though cautious, sensed that this man was not just a random passerby. In his presence, she felt that same aura of power that had once guided her. Trump was a man who, despite his earthly nature, possessed something special. There was a fire in his eyes, one that could burn everything in its path. And Emily knew immediately. Emily answered him, not looking back at her fears. She understood that this alliance was not just a coincidence. It was meant to be. She couldn't deny that Donald Trump was the one who was destined to take a part of her fate. But she also knew that her power couldn't be handed over easily. It required sacrifices, it required faith. And only together could they understand what needed to happen next. The shadow of power, which had thickened around her, now enveloped him as well. Emily knew that this alliance would change everything, but she also knew the cost would be high. The partnership between Trump and Emily didn't form overnight. It wasn't just a political move, but something much deeper than what one might expect from two powerful individuals meeting. These encounters were complicated, full of unspoken things and hidden meanings, but with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger. At first, Emily had been cautious. She couldn't trust her power with just anyone, but her intuition told her Trump was more than just a political player. He was someone who could understand her, see in her something more than just a girl with unusual abilities. She knew his ambitions were limitless, but at some point, she realized that he possessed qualities that made him the exact person needed to fulfill her mission. In his desire for power, in his wish to change the world, she felt an echo. Trump was a man who wasn't afraid to take risks, and in that, her inner voice told her their alliance could be fruitful. At first, their interactions were more about learning than collaborating. Emily opened the door to a world of knowledge that Trump had never considered. She taught him to read hidden signs, to understand the invisible connections that governed not only people but all of reality. This knowledge had no parallels in the world of political strategies or economic calculations Trump knew. He couldn't help but feel that what she was passing on to him was connected to the very foundation of existence itself. She spoke to him of time, how it could be influenced, stretched, compressed, and directed. But with each of her words, he felt more and more that this knowledge was foreign to his nature. Emily was not just a teacher. She was a bridge into a new world that Trump was only beginning to grasp. Despite his ambitions, Trump still remained a man for whom reality followed physical laws. But Emily's power was different. It didn't obey simple rules, and perhaps that was what attracted him most. He saw in her not just a strange girl, but a unique resource that could lead him to the heights of power he had always dreamed of. With each day, Trump immersed himself deeper in her world. He taught her, and she taught him. At one point, Emily even marveled at how quickly he absorbed everything she was offering. He was not only smart but flexible in his approach, and that allowed him to grasp her teachings faster than she had expected. They began spending hours discussing things, exchanging thoughts, and with each such conversation, Emily increasingly realized that Trump might just be the one to carry on her mission, taking responsibility for the future of the country and the world. But these discussions were not always peaceful. Trump was a man driven by determination, and his desire to control everything around him sometimes led to tension. Emily, for her part, could not tolerate inconsistency or inattention to detail. She explained to him that power was not just about control, but about understanding and letting go, becoming part of something greater than your own ego. You won't defeat the old system if you act only for yourself, she said to him one evening after a long conversation. Your power is not only the authority you can gain, it's knowledge that you must use for the greater good. But you need to realize that every action you take will have consequences. Trump listened to her, feeling she was telling the truth. He was a man used to achieving success at any cost, but now his view of the world was starting to shift. He began asking himself, what happens if I go further than just controlling America? What if I can change not just America, but the whole world? This question became both philosophical and a challenge. He began preparing himself for the responsibility that would come with these changes. But Emily didn't give him the answer to that question. She couldn't simply hand it all over. She knew that even in her immense power, there was only a limited amount of knowledge she could pass on. But she also knew her mission was tied to this man, and she had to give him enough so he could continue her work. But at what cost? Their alliance became stronger, but it also became more tense. Emily realized that Trump was willing to do anything to achieve his goals, And that meant it wasn't going to be easy to explain to him that power came with a price. He wasn't ready for the sacrifices that would need to be made in order to achieve something truly great. In that moment of understanding, that was her power. She was ready to go all the way, but only if her partner understood the weight of the path ahead. At this point, Trump began to realize that he wasn't just striving for power. His thirst for power was now part of an internal transformation. He began to see how his actions impacted people, how his decisions changed their lives. He started understanding that each step he took could lead to irreversible consequences. But now, thanks to Emily, he was becoming more cautious. His ambitions hadn't disappeared. They had become deeper, more thoughtful. "You will be the one to lead America," Emily told him one day as they sat together in her room, filled with old books. "But you must understand, this is not just a political game. This is a new world, and you must be ready for the consequences that your power will bring." These words became the most important lesson for Trump in their alliance. He realized that gaining such power wasn't just about taking it and using it. He had to be wise. He had to understand how to wield it correctly. But the question he still asked himself remained the same. What would the price of his power be? As the days passed, they grew even closer. Emily prepared him to take on her mission, but also prepared him for the possibility that he might have to walk one of the hardest paths of his life. Trump was ready. He felt that his life would never be the same again. Time went on, and Emily increasingly realized that her days on this earth were numbered. She felt her strength slipping away, and every movement became harder. Her body aged like an ancient tree, but her spirit remained unshaken. However, even her immense power couldn't slow the natural flow of time. More and more, her inner voice reminded her that her mission was not yet finished, and that her purpose was not just to pass on knowledge, but to prepare the world for what was to come after her departure. Her strength became hazy and unclear, but Emily knew one thing for certain. Her time in this world was drawing to a close. She was ready to pass her mission to Trump. Inside, there was no fear, no regret. On the contrary, she felt relief and even gratitude that, in him, she had found a worthy successor. Emily could already see how Trump would act, how he might become the one to lead America and the world into a new era. But her predictions, like everything tied to her power, remained unclear. Trump was still a man who had yet to learn everything she had passed on to him, but he was ready. And now the moment had come when Emily had to pass on not just her knowledge, but the full weight of responsibility that came with it. Emily thought long and hard about how to transfer not only her power to Trump, but the understanding that this power required immense responsibility. She explained to him, "Trump, you must understand one thing. I'm not just giving you my powers. I am giving you responsibility. You must be ready to face those who will oppose change. You must be ready for things to contradict your desires and plans. But you must remember that the power you will have is not yours. It is a part of the world. You are just the vessel." Trump was silent. He could feel the weight of her words, but he also knew that now he could not turn back. He had become a more mature man, wiser than ever before, and though he didn't fully understand the burden placed on him, he was ready to accept it. "I'm ready, Emily," he said firmly, though with a hint of uncertainty, like a man stepping onto a path from which there was no return. "I'm ready to move forward." Emily watched him, feeling her strength slip away completely. She knew it was time to pass on everything she had accumulated over her life. In that moment, she handed him the final key, not a physical one, but a spiritual one. She passed on to Trump the symbol of her power and wisdom, one that was meant to be his guiding star in the future. This was the moment of completion, the moment of farewell, the moment when she realized that her mission was finished. Trump stood beside her. He felt something unknown overwhelm him, something powerful invading his consciousness, as if a new door had opened within his inner world. He couldn't explain what exactly was happening, but he felt that he was no longer just a man. He had become someone who had to guide the world through uncharted hardships. He understood that the power he had accepted was not just authority. It was something far more complex. Emily quietly smiled and closed her eyes. In that moment, she knew that her work was done. She had done everything she could. She was ready to leave. When Emily passed away, Trump stood in silence, overwhelmed by a new realization. He could feel the world around him shifting, how his life would now serve new purposes, new ideas. He had become the one to lead America through the storm of change, the one who would make decisions that would affect the future. But he knew one thing. This was no longer just political influence. This was something bigger. He carried the responsibility of Emily's legacy, and he was ready to do whatever it took to continue her mission. But his journey was just beginning. When Emily passed, the world around Trump changed. Her death was quiet, without outward signs, but for him, it became the most important event in his life. He felt her energy leaving, but her spirit and legacy remained with him. Emily had passed on not only her power and knowledge, but also some invisible, almost mystical trace that now guided his thoughts and actions. That trace was felt in every decision he made, in every step he took. He stood by her bedside, feeling time shift. She was gone, but her memory, her lessons, her words had become a part of him. Trump knew that he was not just tasked with continuing her work. He had become the one to lead the country and the world into a new era. But his understanding of that path was still unclear. He was ready to take on the responsibility, but he also sensed that his role was not just that of a political leader. He had become something more, a mystical guide, someone who not only governs a people but also sees the future. In the days after her death, he was confused. He couldn't yet fully grasp what had just happened. How could he so suddenly go from being just a successful businessman to becoming the keeper of knowledge and power that Emily had left behind? How could he become a person who didn't merely govern a country, but possibly decided the fate of all humanity? Trump spent many nights contemplating everything he had learned, everything Emily had instilled in him. Now he saw the world differently. Before, he was prepared to manage only within the confines of certain political and economic systems, but now new horizons opened up to him, the same ones Emily had once shown him. She had taught him how to govern people, but more importantly, how to govern events. She had passed on to him the ability to see the hidden connections between things, to understand that every step in the world was part of a chain of events, and every decision came with its price. Emily's legacy was complex and multifaceted. He knew that now his decisions could no longer be mere political maneuvers. Every word, every step he took would influence people, the future, reality itself. And this was not just knowledge to be respected. It was power that now rested on his shoulders. But he felt that a trial awaited him. The path that Emily had pointed to was now his to walk alone. Saying goodbye to Emily became not just a moment of loss for Trump, but also a moment of inner transformation. He began to understand that this moment marked the culmination of everything that had happened in his life. With each passing day, he felt his inner world changing, his understanding of reality taking on new forms. He began to sense how the influential forces that once seemed distant and abstract were now becoming tangible and real to him. The world had become more malleable, and his influence more significant. He was no longer just part of the political machine. He was its leader, and now he could direct it toward a future that no one dared to imagine. At the moment of farewell, when Emily passed, Trump felt that everything she had taught him, everything she had given him, had become a part of him. It wasn't just knowledge that could be passed down or preserved in a book. It was something deeper. It was a force that impacted his perception, his soul. He couldn't explain what was happening, but he knew that he had now become a part of something far more significant than just a political career or business. He continued his work despite the inner doubts. But now, every decision was weighed more carefully than ever before. He saw how the world was changing, how people reacted to his actions. He became more cautious in his steps. For now he understood that his influence was not merely the result of pragmatic politics, but part of a deeper process, in which he played the role of the guide. The parting with Emily left in Trump not only a sense of loss, but also the feeling that he was no longer just a man. He had become a symbol. He had become the one who bore the responsibility for the future. And while the road ahead was uncertain, he knew he now carried the power that would help him navigate it. His decisions now affected more than just the economy or politics. He felt that perhaps he had become part of something greater, something that couldn't be explained by words. Trump realized that his role in the world had changed forever. He was no longer just a businessman, no longer just a politician. He had become part of a chain that stretched across centuries, linking the past, the present, and the future. Everything he had learned, everything he now carried within him, was tied to Emily's legacy. And even though she had passed, her words and teachings would remain with him forever. This was her farewell, her passing on, her final act that now lived within him, and one that he would have to develop to bring her dreams to life. This was no simple process. It was a profound and multifaceted change, one that affected not only his inner world but the world around him. He knew that serious trials lay ahead, that his power and influence would be questioned and criticized. But now, having accepted her legacy, he felt ready. Ready to face these trials and perhaps create the world Emily had dreamed of, a world in which her lessons and her power would live on in him and in the people he would lead. The farewell to Emily had become not just a moment of loss, but a moment of realization. He had become who he was meant to be. And although the road ahead was difficult and unpredictable, Trump knew that he had become someone who could change the world.